In May 2016, the President of Palestinian Authority, Mahmood Abbas, claimed in a speech that the Palestinians are Philistines and that they have descended mostly from the ancient Philistines. He added that the Bible says Philistines lived in the Levant before the forefathers of Israelites and the Jews arrived there. He implied that the Palestinians therefore have the ancient connection to the land and has to be seen as the rightful heirs of the land of Palestine today. Sometime later, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, posted in his Twitter that the origin of the Philistines is in southern Europe, hinting that the Philistines are not indigenous to the region. Therefore, he implied their claim as the rightful heirs is historically untenable and false. So both caused quite a stir and led to heated debates and still being discussed. If you notice, these claims and counterclaims are centered around the ancient Philistines and their connection to the present-day Palestinians who live in the West Bank or the Judea-Samaria area and Gaza. So in this episode, I would like to explore this question: whether the Palestinians are the descendants of the ancient Philistines. Can the statement by President Abbas be justified in view of historical evidences? To understand the origin of the Philistine civilization, we shall briefly look at the biblical records, and then we will move on to explore history, archaeology, and genetics to uncover whether there is a civilizational continuity between the ancient Philistines and the modern Palestinians. Our overall intention is to encourage both sides to arrive at a peaceful solution where both can coexist as equal neighbors and watch out for each other, thriving together in the same region. Welcome to Discern Scripture YouTube channel. In the last few episodes, we have explored the ancient connection of the Jews to the land, particularly through archaeological references, and the third episode exclusively traced the origin of Palestine through times. If you haven't watched these episodes, please check them out. I will add the links in the description below. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do subscribe and support the channel. Feel free to check through our content and share it with those that might be interested. Now, let's get on with the video. What does the Bible say about the origin of Philistines? First, Philistines appear in the Bible from the book of Genesis through the entire Old Testament. The first reference to Philistines come in Genesis chapter 10, and the last reference come in Zephaniah chapter 2, verses 4 to 7, the post-exilic book. If you look closely, the Bible distinguishes between two groups of Philistines, the early ones that we see in Genesis and the later Philistines we see in the book of Judges and thereafter. So does the Bible really give us a hint on these distinctions? We can find some ancient support from the Septuagint and also from the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. Now, Septuagint refers to the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, 3rd century BC. The Septuagint used two distinct Greek words to refer to Philistines in the Bible. For the Philistine references in Genesis, the word Philistine is used, and the Philistines from Judges onwards, another word, allophili, is used. It means foreigners or strangers. We can say that the early Jewish people did see these Philistines different, not essentially of the same origin. The Jewish rabbinic sources, they also insist that the Philistines of Judges and Samuel were different people altogether from the Philistines of Genesis. But that's the first thing to remember in our discussion on Philistines in the Bible. There were two distinct groups of Philistines. The ones we meet in Genesis were different from the ones we meet in the book of Judges and later on. Second, the Bible says that the Philistines came from a place called Caphtor. I would like to share three biblical references here. Genesis chapter 10, it lists the table of nations, how nations spread from Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis chapter 10, verse 14, it lists the descendants of the second son of Ham called Mizraim or Egypt. This is what it says: Pathrusites, Casluhites, and Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. Another reference is from Amos chapter 9, verse 7. And the Philistines came from Caphtor and the Syrians from Kir. Jeremiah chapter 47, verse 4, the Lord is about to destroy the Philistines, the remnant from the coasts of Caphtor. Jeremiah identifies the Philistines as a remnant from the coasts or the Isle of Caphtor. The Isle of Kaftor is identified as the island of Crete by most biblical scholars. New Living Translation translates the word Kaftor directly as Crete. Jeremiah 47:4, those colonists from the island of Crete. Contemporary English version also translate this verse as you refugees from Crete. Even today, there is an island called Karpathos near Crete. See the similarity between Kaftor and Karpathos. Cretans of the past had a wide-ranging trade network in the ancient times, as early as the 2nd millennium BC. Archaeological excavations in Crete have shown that the island was a center of Minoan culture in the 2nd century, in the 2nd millennium BC, and the population traded with Egypt, Canaan, Syria, and Mesopotamia, and other regions. The third thing I want to share about what Bible says about the Philistines is this. This people from Kaftor, or Crete, they came and colonized the coastal regions of Canaan and displaced the indigenous Canaanite population from their towns. We can see the reference in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 23. It tells us about the Kaftorite invasion or takeover of the coastal areas in Canaan from the local people. And as for the Abites who lived in the villages as far as Gaza, the Kaftorites coming out from Kaftor destroyed them and settled in their place. The Kaftorites here are seen as the colonists who are evicting the indigenous Abites from their lands and then taking over and settling in their place. Here is a fourth point. Abraham and Isaac had some encounter with them in Gerar, a town not far from Gaza. So in Genesis chapter 21, Abraham met with them. In Genesis 26, Isaac met with them. In the same place, the region was Gerar. Genesis 21:32. So they made a treaty at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, returned to the land of the Philistines. And later on, we see that the Abimelech is called as the king of the Philistines. In the Bible, if you look very carefully, the Philistine leaders were not called as kings in the later times. They were all called as rulers. The Bible calls the Philistine overlords as rulers, tyrannos, a derivation of the Greek word tyrannos, from which we get our English word tyrant. Now, Genesis 26 verse 1. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the earlier famine of Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. In these encounters, the Philistines are not presented as major people group. They made treaties with individuals like Abraham and Isaac to strengthen their security and alliances. In general, critical biblical scholars would take these references to Philistines in Genesis as cases of anachronism, words appearing before their times. Others see that these Philistines have to be connected to the Abites who dwelt in the land, whom the later Philistines or Kaftorites evicted from their hometowns. The second phase of Kaftorite or Philistine movement happened before the Israelites under Joshua arrived in the land of Canaan. So they would emerge as one of the formidable powers in the region, occupying 5 major urban centers of the Canaanites. We call them Philistine Pentapolis, or 5 cities of the Philistines. Book of Joshua, chapter 13, verses 2 and 3, refers to it as the land still to be conquered. Joshua chapter 13, verses 2 and 3. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and Geshurites, from the Shihor River on the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron on the north, all of it counted as Canaanite, the territory of the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, that of the Avites. So the book of Joshua identifies the Canaanite nature of these cities, but currently at that point of time, it was taken over by the Philistines, who invaded into that region and evicted the native Canaanite tribes. And there is one more point. God did not allow the people of Israel to go through the way of the Philistines. Exodus chapter 13, verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God led them not by the way of the land of Philistines, although that was nearer. Now pay attention to this, the way of the land of the Philistines, or the road through the Philistine country. So the road or the way of the land of the Philistines, it describes a small portion of the route, later known as the Via Maris, the way of the sea. It's a very popular coastal road used for commerce and also for conquest. It connected the Nile Delta region with Canaan, Syria, and beyond towards Mesopotamia. Again, Bible makes it very clear that these 5 cities of the Philistines were originally Canaanite cities, but they were held by or occupied by later Philistines. The argument that the Philistines were indigenous to the land and that they were always there are not supported by biblical explanations. They came from outside, from Kaftor, but quickly assimilated into the Canaanite culture through intermarriage and rapid cultural exchange. What does history tell us on the origin of Philistines? The word Palestinian and Palestine both are derived from Philistines. The root of this word Philistines, it comes from Egyptian Peliset. As we noted in episode 3, the Peliset were sea people who attacked Egypt in 12th century BC. It was not an isolated incident. Something important happened in the 12th century BC that changed the ancient world. Historians call this period the Bronze Age collapse or the Late Bronze Age collapse. The Late Bronze Age collapse affected large area of Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East, in particular Egypt, Eastern Libya, the Balkans, the Aegean, Anatolia, and the Caucasus regions, mainly the regions around the Mediterranean Sea. It was a sudden, violent, and culturally disruptive for many Bronze Age civilizations. This brought very sharp economic decline in the regional powers. Several reasons: famine, mass migration, iron metallurgy, and so on. Several empires collapsed during this era. States of Hatti, Ugarit, Ashkelon, and Hazor were all destroyed violently. Whenever we discuss about the late Bronze Age collapse, we would always hear about sea people as one of the causes that contributed to the Bronze Age collapse. The sea people were not just on a military operation. The sea people were searching for a new homeland. The sea people were trying to find a place to settle. Only few empires survived after the Bronze Age collapse, like the Assyrians, Elamites, and Egyptians, and Greece went into a long, dark age. Now, who were these sea people? The sea people were not monolithic. They were made of several subgroups. Pharaoh Ramses III's inscription in Medinet Habu mortuary temple records several groups of the sea people. The Peliset were one of them. They attacked different parts of the ancient world and empires. They attacked Syria, the Hittite Empire, the ancient Egyptian Empire. They attacked Cyprus, and so on. They had superior weapons, and the empires fell before them. There is a group of documents called Alashia Correspondence. It's part of the Amarna letters. It tells us about the scale of the sea people invasion. So these letters contain correspondence between the king of Ugarit and the king of Alashia, which is Cyprus. So king of Ugarit, which is in Syria, was asking for help to safeguard his region from the attacks of these sea people. Now, Hittite Empire came to its end at the hands of the sea people, but Egypt was able to defend itself against the sea people invasion, and Pharaoh Ramses III decisively defeated the sea people at the Battle of Nile Delta around 1175 BC. The sea people, particularly the Peliset, were moved out of the Egyptian region and perhaps with Pharaoh's consent to settle in the southern coasts of Canaan. And they established themselves around the 5 major cities known as the Philistine Pentapolis. This fits well with the biblical description of Philistines as people who came from Kaftor or Crete from the Aegean islands. Now let's turn on to this important question. What do we know about the Philistine civilization and its eventual decline and demise? As we noted, the Philistines emerged in Canaan in 12th century BC, and they were eliminated as distinct people group by the 6th century BC. So when we talk about Philistine civilization, we refer to this period, which is roughly about 600 years. Philistines lived mainly on coastal regions, mainly in and around the 5 city-states. And also, they were trying to expand their influence over mainlands and the hill areas. So ancient Israelites lived on the mainland and hill country, and they pushed the Philistines back. So this conflict continued for centuries. At times, Philistines overpowered the Israelites. At other times, the Israelites kept the Philistines under their rule. Israelite judges like Samson struggled against Philistines with some measure of success. And the very reason Israel demanded a king was to lead them to fight against the Philistine threat. The first king of Israel, Saul, led military expeditions against the Philistines, but he was eventually killed in the Battle of Mount Gilboa. We can see that in 1 Samuel chapter 31. King David fought with them on various occasions and overpowered them. The fight between Goliath, the Philistine, and David is immortalized in the Bible and also in the popular memory. Philistines continue to wage war against other kings. King Hezekiah also fought and defeated them during his reign. Besides warfare, there were periods of coexistence as well. In archaeological sites, Tel Megiddo and Tel Dan, we can see evidences of Philistine and Israelite settlements in close proximity. There are instances where the material culture appeared to show a degree of shared influence. This tells us that there were also periods of interactions, coexistence, and mutual trade between them, and also occasional conflicts due to the nature of ancient societies occupying the same geographical region. Now let's discuss about the decline and the deportation of the Philistines. The Philistine cities were in decline by the time the Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian empires invaded the Levant. So these invasions weakened the Philistine city-states. The Assyrian under King Sargon II attacked and destroyed Ashdod 711 BC. Later, during the Babylonian conquests, Ashkelon was taken by Nebuchadnezzar II in 604 BC. The Philistine cities were destroyed and a large number of its population were deported by the Babylonians into cities across the Euphrates River. We can even see the name of the king of Ashkelon in the Ratian inscriptions of Babylonians. The king of Ashkelon was in exile and the Philistines were serving the Babylonian kings. There is no record of them returning back to Philistia and repopulating it, since they themselves did not have a strong association with the land, except it was their home for 600 years. Perhaps they blended well with the Babylonian society and disappeared as distinct people. So it is also reasonable to state that not all the Philistines were deported to Babylonia. However, Philistines never emerged as a significant political entity after this period. The Philistines simply ceased to exist as distinct political entity and blended into Canaanite and Israelite population. In the 4th century, Alexander conquered this region on his way to Egypt, but by the time the Philistines had already disappeared as distinct political and cultural entities. Now, with these historical and biblical information in our mind, now let's turn to the central question of this episode. Are the Palestinians related to the Philistines? This is a question of continuity. Let's look at it from 7 different angles. The Palestinians feel that they are firmly connected to this land just as their Jewish neighbors. So they very boldly make this claim that they are the descendants of the Canaanites, they are the descendants of the Philistines. I would like to look at it from 7 different angles. First, is there a genetic continuity? The Leon Levy expedition to Ashkelon, led by the Leon Levy Foundation and the Harvard Semitic Museum, has been conducting extensive excavation at the site of Ashkelon between 1985 to 2016. The researchers were able to obtain DNA samples from the remains of 10 individuals who lived in Ashkelon during 12th to 11th century BC, which is a time period associated with the presence of Philistines in the region. The findings of the study suggested that the ancient Philistines were genetically distinct from the surrounding population in the Levant. The result indicated a significant genetic contribution from population from Aegean region. So one key observation was the genetic similarity between the Philistines and individuals from ancient Crete, supporting the idea of a connection with Aegean population from the island of Kaftar or Crete. On the other hand, the Palestinians, they do not share Greek Philistine DNA. Rather, the Palestinian DNA combination reflects their Semitic roots. Their DNA does not have any continuity with the Philistine DNA. The second question, is there an archaeological continuity between the Palestinians and the Philistines? Now here I want to compare the potteries. Comparing potteries is an important part of archaeology. The Philistines left behind unique bichrome pottery that is distinct from the Canaanite and Israelite potteries. Take a look at this beautiful pottery. These are from the Philistine regions. These ceramics feature distinctive red and black coloration and intricate designs, often depicting animals and geometric patterns. The Philistine material culture also shows evidence of influences from both the Aegean and the local Canaanite traditions. So this is seen in their pottery and in architecture and other artifacts. What about the Palestinians? Have they replicated or imitated the unique Philistine style of pottery? No, the pottery from the Arab conquest onwards, it shows Islamic motifs and calligraphy. There is a marked discontinuity between these two groups in terms of pottery evidence. Is there a racial continuity between the Philistines and the Palestinians? Philistines are presented in history as Greeks from the Aegean Islands, particularly from Crete. They were racially quite different and had different features than those who lived in the land of Canaan. On the other hand, the Palestinians are not Greeks. They are mostly Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula. Others are from the same land, the Samaritans and the Jews and others. So the Palestinians are racially West Asian and Semitic. There is a definite racial discontinuity between these two groups. Is there a linguistic continuity between the Palestinians and the Philistines? Now, the language of the Philistines is a matter of historical curiosity. The Philistines did not leave behind any written artifacts. There is no inscriptions. Though they must have been literate, there is an absence of Philistine inscriptions or other written information from the Philistine regions. What we have is actually, it comes from the neighboring regions. So some theorize that they must have spoken some form of Cretan language, which is known as Eto-Cretan. However, we don't have any specific evidences to verify this theory. On the other hand, the Palestinians, they speak Arabic. They have gone through this process of Arabization and they all speak Arabic. So the language does not share anything in common with that of the Philistines. There is sure a linguistic discontinuity because we know Arabic was not spoken in this region before the Arab conquest. Is there a religious continuity? Now, as for the religion, Philistines were polytheists. They worshipped the god Dagon. Dagon was a major god in the Philistine pantheon. And he's also mentioned in the biblical text as well as in the other ancient Near Eastern sources. Dagon was often depicted as a god of fertility, agriculture, and fish. The Philistine religious beliefs were likely diverse with various deities associated with different aspects of life and nature. On the other hand, the modern Palestinians do not share any religious continuity with the Philistines. Most Palestinians practice Islam, which entered the region in the 7th century. There is a sure case of religious continuity. There is nothing these both people share in common in terms of religious expressions. The next question, is there a historical continuity? As I already said, the Philistines as a distinct group of people, they ceased to exist in Levant in 6th century BC. Their defeat and deportation under the Neo-Babylonians was decisive, and they never repopulated their cities in large numbers. They were supplanted by other people groups in the same region. The Palestinian identity, as perceived today, does not extend beyond few decades. If we go far back, it would go all the way to the British Mandate Palestine years.
Famous, important Palestinian in history.
Oh, yes, Arafat.
No, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
We don't know anybody from 200 years ago.
There is a glaring lack of historical continuity between Palestinians and the Philistines. Is there a geographical continuity between Palestinians and the Philistines? Now, ancient Philistines lived around the 5 major cities close to the Mediterranean coast. The land of Philistia was located close to the coast. Modern Palestinians, most of them live in Gaza and in the West Bank. So there is a partial continuity in this case. So as you can see, there is a discernible discontinuity between the Philistines and the Palestinians on several areas. Both are genetically different and racially different. One is Semitic and another one is Greek or non-Semitic. They do not share a common language. The religions are far different from each other. The Philistines and the Palestinians also have dietary differences. The Philistines were pork eaters. They ate plenty of pork, but Palestinians do not. So people have recovered a lot of pork bones in the archaeological digs and so on. The Philistines did not practice circumcision. Palestinians, most of them, they practice it. Ancient Egyptians, Canaanites, and Israelites, they all practice circumcision, but Philistines did not. The only thing that is common between the Palestinians and the Philistines is that the Palestinians happen to live on the same lands where the ancient Philistines once lived. This does not constitute a basis to claim that the Palestinians are descended from the Philistines or related to the Philistines in any concrete sense. Here is my closing reflection. Now let's get back to the question that we asked in the beginning. Are Philistines related to Palestinians? When Mahmood Abbas spoke about Philistines that Abraham and Isaac met, he was talking about the early mention of Philistines in the Bible in the book of Genesis. They were probably the Avites, one of the Canaanite tribes that lived in the region. When Netanyahu spoke about Philistines that came from the southern European region, he was talking about the later Philistines whom we see in the Bible and history from 12th century and later on. Both were speaking of the Philistines, but without making these fine distinctions. Thus, their speech or messages conflate history and bend it to justify their ideological goals. It is important to note that when the Philistines are mentioned in general, we think of the Philistine Pentapolis from 12th century and the later years. From that perspective, the claim of Abbas cannot be justified in view of the evidences that we have at hand. So apart from the superficial phonetic similarity and the partial geographical continuity, there is nothing substantial that can relate the modern Palestinians with the ancient Philistines. And this is the fact anyone who objectively look at the evidences has to come to terms with. The Palestinians have little in common with these Philistines, who are non-Semitic people from the Aegean regions. So we can say that the Palestinians are not descended from the Philistines. They are Semitic. Palestinians are not Philistines and vice versa. However, to establish historical connections, the Palestinians have to look toward their Jewish neighbors. They have greater genetic similarity with the Jews than with the Philistines who lived in Canaan for a few centuries. It is about time the Palestinians realize that the bonds that connect them with the Jews are stronger than the causes that divide them. It is only by turning to each other, Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians can envision a future of peace and prosperity for themselves and their generations. As Christians, we continue to pray for a peaceful coexistence of Jews and Palestinians in the land of Canaan, living as equal neighbors, looking out for each other, and marching into a new future of shared prosperity. Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe and support our channel. Please feel free to leave your thoughts and comments in the section below. Once again, may God bless you. Shalom.